Cotter as Guantanamo's child. His childhood was once taken and then filed. There was a time when he once was a dreamer, before he was pronounced a terrorist and a schemer. Born in Canada, his family moved back and forth to Pakistan, and many times they crossed over to Afghanistan. His father was seeking the roots of his belief system. He was also involved in raising money for the belief system. His children preferred Canada and the comforts of the West, while their father thought exposure to their religious roots was the best. In Pakistan, his father raised dozens of rabbits, and spending time watching them was one of his habits. When his young daughter accidentally crippled one who lay dying, Omar's father sat there staring at it and silently crying. Omar was the favorite son who loved the adventures of Tintin. He didn't often think life in the Middle East was a win-win. From the comforts of a Scarborough home to the Pakistan poverty, no one asked Omar what it was he wanted to be. He was a boy swept up by his family ties to the Taliban, a connection that would end up in a firefight in Afghanistan. It was a connection that you never wanted to voice. It could find you imprisoned without any choice. When Omar was 9, his father chose starvation to protest his arrest, while Omar learned there were things in this world that people detest. This was confirmed when his father was seriously wounded and almost died, where he learned that there were many people who are not on the same side. Like any son, Omar loved his father and feared for his life. He knew they were living in a country that lived by the gun and the knife. 3 times his father tried to convince his older brother to become a suicide bomber. Because his brother was the problem child, he thought life without him would be calmer. He told him there would be a paradise of virgins to give him a heroic hello, while Omar said his idea of paradise was a swimming pool filled with jello. A kid who liked music, movies, and Harry Potter books. When he was captured, he still had his little boy looks. You see, Omar was a kid who spent most of his time with his sister and mother. In order to travel unnoticed, he was once forced to wear a burqa to remain undercover. His family once had 2 cats, a hedgehog, and a turtle as pets. Regardless of the discouragement of keeping animals, they had no regrets. You see, like many of us, they enjoyed the pleasure of having animals, despite the West's desire to paint them as heartless as cannibals. Asked by some men for Omar's linguistic abilities, to travel to an area needing translation capabilities, his father never realized he would never again see his son, that in 2002 his life would be forever changed by the gun. By the time the gunfire and grenades had stopped, his life had been ruined. He lay on the ground with 2 huge holes in his chest and a blinding eye wound. They say that he threw the grenade that killed an American medic, and we have to believe them if the Americans said it, even though there was much that their story did lack, like they were firing at the Afghans, so of course they fired back. They seem to believe that they can go into another country and kill, that the people should stop what they're doing and stand still. And if they dare to fight back, then they've broken some law. They become guilty of the crime the Americans saw. Then they can be taken away beyond the Geneva Convention, where they can subject them to torture and illegal detention. A child soldier at 15, Omar never received that description. They viewed him as old enough for a military conscription. He was covered with scars from shrapnel, which earned him a nickname. They called him Buckshot because the scars that he had looked the same. And you can be sure they made the best of the wounds they inflicted. And I'm sure there were times where his life felt constricted. It was a while before they shipped him off to Guantanamo, and what they did before that I'm sure I don't want to know. It was clear the Americans wanted to scapegoat the holdup, so Omar became the one thrown into the river he was sold up. Because no one can be sure just who lobbed that fatal grenade. There was no proof at all, just the assumptions the Americans made. But anyone who resisted American invasion were convicted of war crimes and resisting persuasion. They made the trip to Guantanamo in sensory deprivation, meant to disorient and confuse their sense of sensation. Dressed in orange jumpsuits and forced to their knees, with earmuffs and goggles so that nobody sees. They were taken to a prison outside legal restrictions, a place of torture without any public depictions. But then Abu Ghraib gave us a pretty clear picture of the techniques used as part of the torturer's mixture. As the pictures of degradation flashed on our screens, we saw image after image of violation scenes. Men who were forced into stress position for hours on end. People frozen in place, not allowed to stand or to bend. The U.S. released the torture memo apparently to govern their actions, but it was really only a ploy to manipulate the public reactions. It only forbade death, organ failure, or body function impairment, but it never offered a clear definition of what despair meant. For 4 days, a taxi driver stood chained to the top of the cell. He was beaten regularly in the legs until his legs began to swell. In the end, he looked like he was run over by a bus. The fact that he was wrongly accused never caused any fuss, nor the reality that his injuries caused a cardiac arrest. After all, he was the kind of people that the Americans detest. Were any Americans ever brought into a court of law? Did anyone bother to reveal the American flaw? Did his family ever get to read an impact statement? Did anyone ever explain what too little too late meant? And that's what it's really about. It's about American greed. All the turmoil they've caused in other countries and the hatred they feed. And if we're faced with extremists who want to blow us away, we might want to ask what made them that way. Like when they took a 15-year-old kid and twisted his mind, took his childhood away, and now what's left behind? They claim he's a fanatical jihadi and will continue to fight us, that if it's ever set free, you can be sure he will slight us. But who radicalized the kid who loved Harry Potter? Who paralyzed his brother and then killed his father? Who left him depressed with post-traumatic stress? And the only chance for freedom is if he'd confess, so the Americans could hold him up as the murderer they painted him, and take no responsibility for all the pain that had tainted him. Yet still he stands there and apologizes to the American wife, who calls him a murderer who has no right to a life. He dreams of being a doctor who could relieve others' pain, despite of all the people that he has seen slain. It seems after all they haven't killed off his spirit. Perhaps in his despair he lost the ability to fear it. He was thrown into a world that was completely war-torn. It's time to bring him back to the place he was born. Omar Carter is a Canadian. We should demand that he be brought back. Let's have the courage to demonstrate the fairness that the Americans lack.